What is it that makes the British seaside sinister? Why does it seem to attract so many killers? Is it the fact that the tide washes away their sins? Is it the fact that it's the end of the line? There's nothing overly frightening about a big wheel or a carousel. But what is undeniable is that the British seaside attracts and has always attracted death and murder. Hello, I'm Geoffrey Wansell. I write about crime, true crime. And in this new series, I want you to join me on a journey to the cliff's edge, where land meets the sea and where life meets death. Whilst some may consider my opinions to be bold, they have been formed after writing bestsellers about real killers for the past 30 years and staring evil in the face. For make no mistake, there is something sinister about our British seaside towns. On the surface, they're all funfairs, candy floss and breezy promenades. But by digging a little deeper in the sand, we uncover an underworld of misfits and misfeasance, murder and mayhem. And reveal the dark lives of the most deadly coastal killers to ever stalk our shores. In today's episode, we tell the story of Michael Ross, the boy murderer who sent a shockwave through the Isle of Orkney. Imagine the scene. It is shortly after 7 o'clock on a bright June evening in 1994 in Kirkwall in the Orkneys. There are diners in an Indian restaurant called the Mumutaz. Shamsuddin Mahmood, who is 26, is serving, whether it's chicken tikka masala, whether it's Rogan Josh, whether it's a vegetable biryani. All of a sudden, a man walks through the door, tall, strong, but wearing a balaclava. No one knows who he is. He walks directly up to Mahmood with a 9mm pistol in his hand. He raises it and fires at point-blank range, killing Mahmood instantly. He lowers the gun, turns, and walks out of the restaurant. It could almost be a scene from The Godfather. There hasn't been a murder on Orkney for 25 years. The islands are stunned. The local police are called. No one knows anything. This savage, pitiless murder was to remain a mystery for 14 years. The identity of the killer, a matter of speculation, but no one knew.
The scene was sealed off, officers were guarding it, it was taped off. The tables were still set, you could see where chairs had overturned. There was blankets on the floor where the deceased had been covered, but obviously he had been removed by then. And we could see where the bullet had lodged in the wall. Spectacles belonging to the deceased, which were shattered, were on the floor.
One of the local officers is a man called Eddie Ross, who is posted outside the restaurant to make sure that no one goes in or out while they're interviewing the customers.
Eddie Ross was an officer based in Kirkwall. He was a local Orcadian. I knew him. He was a police constable He had been stationed on the mainland, Canusi I think it was. So I was aware of him. I knew him to speak to. He was a local who had gone back to live in his native Orkney. He had been called out that night when the incident happened, and he was on guard duty sealing the premises. And he spoke to them and said, if you let me in to have a look at the bullet, I should be able to identify it for you. And he did do that. He was allowed to do that under their supervision, and he quickly identified it was a 9mm bullet, which was manufactured in the Kirki arsenal, which is in India. And that was obviously very important information for us.
No one would have guessed at that moment in 1994 that the identity of the killer, when it was finally revealed, was the son of the policeman posted outside the restaurant to guard the crime scene. The killer's name was Michael Ross.
Michael Ross is the 15-year-old son of Eddie Ross. He was still in school, 15-year-old. He was keen on the Army Cadets. He was in the local rifle club. And after school, his intention apparently was to join the army.
His father was seen as something of a paragon of virtue. He was highly respected by the local community and by his peers on the island because he was a good shot, he was a good marksman. He was also good with the community, he was good with the children, and he was good with businesses. He would, what you did actually say was great community police officer to all intents and purposes.
Because we knew he was ex-army and he had great firearms expertise, we utilised him in the early stages of the inquiry to go and find every 9mm bullet or gun on the island and test fire it. These were obviously sent away for ballistics, and we never did find anything that matched the gun that fired the fatal bullet.
He raised Michael in a good family home, and you can imagine it was quite comfortable for the island of Orkney, and also in a very hostile environment in as much as he would go out and he would hunt, he'd teach Michael how to shoot. So Michael was learning habits and skills that perhaps most children of his age wouldn't have been used to. So he was going out into farmers' fields and they were shooting rabbits and killing game, etc. Sometimes for the food on the table, but also just for the sport of it. So Michael was learning lots and lots of traits and habits of his father.
Michael Ross and his father Eddie were extremely close. Eddie Ross had been a firearms officer. The son was taught to shoot by his father at an early age. Guns were part of the Ross family heritage.
Along with the growing love of guns, by the time he was 15, the impressionable teenager would see all of his darker thoughts and passions distill into a deadly intention, a murder, and one with racist overtones.
He became a little bit more vocal in his opinion about people and incomers and other people on the islands. People started seeing a different side to him. He was what you'd call maybe a noisy teenager and very vocal. Some of the islanders will say there wasn't a racist bone in his body, but there are other parts of the islands where people will say he was racist and he was making comments about people coming to the islands, and it was accepted that that was maybe a common feeling among some of them, a certain group of people. So there is definitely something there in the background that does seem to define racism, not to the extent where you'd think it was obvious, but certainly personal opinion was becoming a little bit more vocal.
On that fateful night in June 1994, Michael Ross took one of his father's guns, a pistol, loaded it with very specific 9mm ammunition, pulled on a balaclava and walked out of the house with only one intention, and that was the murder of Shamsuddin Mahmud. He was, astonishingly, just 15 years old. Michael Ross was an unhappy, uncomfortable teenager. He saw himself in his father's image. Like his father, he liked firearms. He liked shooting, guns, things that not every teenager has access to. You can speculate how he became angry or racist. At the age of 15, he takes a 9mm pistol, walks in to the Mumutaz restaurant in Kirkwall, walks up to one of the few Asians in Orkney, stands opposite him, points the pistol and blows his head off. He then calmly turns round and walks out of the restaurant again. This, remember, is a 15-year-old boy. This is not some trained assassin. This is not James Bond. This is an adolescent who has no concept of what taking a life could mean, and yet he didn't hesitate to take it.
The murder sent a shockwave through the Isle of Orkney, and no stone was left unturned by the police in the search for the killer.
We carried out house-to-house inquiries in the whole of Kirkwall, which is quite a big town, and that took many days, and then we sent questionnaires to every household in the whole island of Orkney, just looking for information. Over the coming days, we also obtained details of all the people who had been staying in hotels, guest houses, hostels, anything like that on the island, and obtained all of that information. And subsequently, over the coming weeks, we then arranged for local police officers to visit every male that came within the parameters. I can't remember what they were now, but it would be all males were interviewed personally by the police officer, whether that be in America, Australia, wherever they were.
The extensive investigations made by the authorities soon paid dividends with the receipt of a crucial piece of information.
There was an incident in Papdale Woods the month before the murder, and a couple of schoolgirls had seen a chap wandering about in Papdale Woods dressed in a similar fashion to the actual murderer in the restaurant a month later, balaclava, black gear, and he was acting suspiciously, dodging from tree to tree and just not acting properly. They had seen him do that. They didn't know who he was at the time, but sometime later, one of the girls saw him in the street and identified him to the local officers, and it was through, taking her back down to the street the following day that we discovered that this was Michael Ross. Took him in, interviewed him in the police station in the presence of his father, and put to him the Papdale Woods incident, and at that point he denied it point blank. He said he had not been there. We also asked him about the murder, and he gave us an alibi for the time of the murder, saying he'd been in Papdale East housing scheme and had spoken to 3 friends who he named, and that was it. So we let him go with his father, obviously hot foot out, to interview the 3 people he had named, and all 3 of them said that wasn't the case. They remembered the night of the murder because they could hear the sirens going to it. They knew where they were at the time, and they were quite clear that Michael was not with them at that time. We took him in, interviewed him, and he immediately, without any hassle at all, admitted being the person in Papdale Woods. Said he had been there because one of his ex-girlfriends was with a new partner and he was beating her up, and Michael was going to scare him when he came out of school. And that's his explanation for being in the woods. And he was insistent he was not the person, he didn't do it, he would not have it in any shape or form. So after interview, he was released at that point. I made representations to the Chief Constable that I think we should charge him with this murder. I consider we had sufficient to charge him. I would have to say there was some hesitation and do we really have enough? And I was saying, yes, we do, I think. In the event, I can only assume that there wasn't considered to be enough to take it because many years went past. The report just lay there. It was never prosecuted.
In the absence of any other convincing leads to follow, the hard-working detectives were left feeling frustrated, and rumours began to spread like wildfire as to who the killer might be.
At that point in time, the belief was it was a hitman. Somebody had come up to the island specifically to hit on that particular restaurant and that individual. But when it came to local intelligence, where you're hoping that it might identify somebody who would be that kind of individual that would commit such a crime, there was nothing, because people were just seen as local people who were going about their business.
It's got the style of a much older professional hitman, not the style of a 15-year-old. And I can understand the police not looking for a 15-year-old because it doesn't have the characteristics of a 15-year-old.
We delved into the background of the deceased and all of the fellow waiters in the restaurant and concentrated heavily on that for many, many weeks and could find nothing in there that would suggest any motive. Nobody on the island could believe it. They all wanted to believe that it was some mafia hit. The waiter had obviously done something before he came to the island and fallen out badly with some crime gang or something like that, was what the island wanted to believe. Nothing we discovered came up with that, but they were always, people don't lock their doors in Orkney, but they did from this date on. They were obviously all concerned.
I find it hard to explain the murder because there's no known antagonism between the very small Indian community and the island community. There's no known relationship between Michael Ross and his victim. And it's been suggested quite a lot that it was a racist attack.
There was quite a lot of evidence that suggested at that time that there were a number of the boys, particularly those in the cadets, who had racist attitudes to things, one of whom was Michael. And there was evidence from his associates to the effect that he had uttered something along the lines of black people should have guns put to their heads. There were writings, sort of Nazi insignia on books that were found in his house and so on.
He decided that he didn't like the people who worked in there. He didn't have a specific target. It's been claimed that there was motives and reasons behind what he did to this individual. But at the time, people were thinking there has to be more behind this than this is just some local person who has decided to send a warning shot out, if you like, to local immigrants and incomers that they're not really that welcome here.
What I find interesting is the impact on the community. You would imagine that they would be very protective, but if they didn't know who it was, there's the alternative side of it is that they've got a killer in their community. And somehow they didn't seem to be too worried about that. Whether they had some agreement amongst themselves that they wouldn't look too far or what, we don't know. But Orkney Islands are very small communities. If you've got a killer, you'd be worried, or you'd think people would be worried.
What do you expect the Kirkwall police to do? They are a small, tiny force with very few officers available. After all, you're a long way off the north coast of Scotland. Ironically, one of the people they send to protect the crime scene is Michael Ross's father, Eddie. He's then tasked, in the wonderful words of modern policing, with searching for anyone in Orkney who owns a 9mm pistol. Strangely, he doesn't seem to find anyone. In the wake of the murder, Eddie Ross is charged by the police with examining all the 9mm pistols on the island to see if perhaps he can find a match to the gun that was used in the killing in the restaurant. But of course, that gun has disappeared. The bullet, however, has not. 2 months pass. Eddie Ross makes no mention to anyone that he perhaps might have an interest in firearms. He would expect them to know that anyway. Until he boasts one evening in the police station that actually he has a sealed box of bullets containing a bullet remarkably like the one that was used to kill the waiter. They're rather special. They're 1972 Army issue. They are not by any means common. That admission, brag if you will, was to cost Eddie Ross a very great deal.
One morning I came into the office and Eddie approached me and said he had a box of bullets identical to the murder bullet, which I was astonished to hear and said, "What? We've been looking for these all through the island. Why have you just found this out and why are you telling me now?" And he was a bit hesitant. So I instructed the civilian driver we had in our Orkney to go straight home. Eddie, I think, had been a night shift, so I instructed him to go out with Eddie, get the bullets and take them back in to me. There was a sealed box of 9mm bullets, all sealed in cellophane, so obviously the bullet had not come out of that box. I then asked Eddie where he had got the bullets, and he was evasive, couldn't remember. Said he may even have got them in Bisley, which I think is a range down in England, when he was down there, and of course he just couldn't remember. And that was how it was left for that day. I think a day later, I spoke to him again and said, "We need to know where these bullets came from." And he then said he had got them from a local on the island who had handed them to him. He said there was one box of 9mm and 2 boxes of .22 bullets. I asked him who that person was and he wouldn't tell me. I then instructed him to go straight out that night, find him, not speak to him, and take him in to speak to me. And he agreed to do this, went out, came back half an hour later and told me, "I can't find him." So at that point I said, "Right, leave it, take no further action, don't go and look for him, and leave it." When I came in early the following morning, he spoke to me again and said he happened to bump into this chap at 6:30 in the morning and had spoken to him, and I obviously was not happy with that because I told him not to. So then I asked him who it was, and he said he was still hesitant in telling me, and he wouldn't tell me, but he said he'd arranged for the man to come in to be interviewed by me at 2:00. Then at 2:00, the chap did come in. His name was James Spence. He was ex-military, and he told me that he had handed 1 box of 9mm bullets and 1 box of .22 bullets to Eddie many, many months, if not years before, I can't remember. Obviously I was a bit suspicious about this because Eddie had told me there was 1 box of 9mm and 2 boxes of .22. So I pressed him and he wouldn't have it. I didn't say to him, was there 2, but I said, "Are you sure that was the number?" And he wouldn't change his mind. There was 1 box of each, and that was it. Obviously, we had some concerns with the way it had come to light, how he had given them to us, and how there was a discrepancy in the number of boxes. So that obviously was giving us cause for concern. We subsequently, some time later, we went back and we spoke to Spence again, and on this occasion he did agree that there had been, or he told us, that there had been 2 boxes of 9mm bullets. One which had been sealed, which was the one we had, and one which had been opened with some bullets out of it. And that put a new complexion on it. He also told us that 3 times in the period since the murder to this point, Eddie had spoken to him, he'd approached him, spoken to him and said, D.I. Chisholm's going to be coming looking for you. If he comes, don't tell him about the second box of 9mm bullets.
Eddie Ross had actually now started cooking the books, if you like. He'd started changing the landscape and the records relating to that ammunition, because he became aware that somebody, namely his son, must have been involved and used those bullets to fire the weapon that killed Mahmoud.
He did, like a lot of fathers, lied on behalf of his son. I think he went from being a police officer to being a father, and lying for that reason. Whether he knew his son had killed or suspected, we don't know. I think he probably knew his son had been involved. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risked his career.
Eddie Ross was actually charged and he was jailed for 4 years. And even then, with that information and that evidence, there was still very little that they could do to actually nail an offender for the murder. They were still looking, they were still actively searching for a killer. There was still this hitman belief. There was all kinds of stories and myths circulated on the island that there was illegal immigrants living upstairs in the restaurant, and there was 1,000,001 reasons why it wasn't an islander that killed Mahmoud.
Michael joins the army very shortly after the killing in the Indian restaurant in Kirkwall. It's a perfect place for a young man who has had an interest in guns, ammunition, perhaps you might even argue violence, but certainly it provided Michael Ross with the perfect environment to reflect his upbringing with his father Eddie.
At 16, he joined the army and ended up becoming a sergeant and being a sniper. So was this an extension of his childhood? Was he actually joining the army and shooting and legitimately killing people because that's what he liked doing?
He was part of the Black Watch. He served overseas. He was highly regarded by all his service peers and by his commanding officer. And people actually still to this day stand up and say what a great serviceman he was. And he would give his life to help a colleague in distress, and a really good lad that you'd want alongside you in a battle. And yet there was this dark past that he had, that he was keeping secret and private. Maybe being in the armed forces and being in actual warfare situations, that alleviated some of the stresses and the tensions and the obsession he had with firearms and killing, and got that out of his system because he was able to use that in armed combat. We don't know.
As a soldier, Michael Ross excelled. He was well liked and admired, and was even decorated during battle for selfless bravery.
I think it's highly significant he joined the British Army. It gave him the opportunity at 16 to leave a small community, small island, go around the world, see people. He learnt how to be a sniper, he learnt how to kill people. He's already killed once, he's got that personality, that calmness that you need to be a sniper. He's got that. He's comfortable with guns, and the army is an ideal place for him. It also takes him out of the investigations.
Michael Ross enjoyed an extraordinarily distinguished army career. He became a sniper for the Black Watch, decorated at Buckingham Palace, a man of apparently impeccable pedigree, whom no one could possibly have suspected might have a brutal, murderous past.
As far as the outside world was concerned, Michael Ross was a war hero, mentioned in dispatches in Iraq, a sergeant and a sniper in the Black Watch. The perfect example of a man who has done his best for his country. In reality, however, he was something far, far darker. He was a man who at the age of 15 had brutally killed an innocent waiter in a Kirkwall restaurant who had done nothing whatever to harm him or upset him. And he'd done it for the worst and most base motive of all, racism. It wasn't until 2006 that Ross's pretense to the world started to fall apart. For it was then that a witness to his killing came forward to the police and told them that he'd seen Ross change in a cubicle in a public laboratory very close to the restaurant where he killed.
The letter basically said that there was somebody in the public toilet that evening when Michael Ross came in with the balaclava and the weapon and the clothing he was wearing and basically changed into some other clothing, and he'd seen him and had commented, "You've got a gun there," and Michael had said yeah and walked out. Now, the first thing that when this anonymous letter was deposited at the police station, people identified who the handwriting was. So the police went to that person and said, "You have been in trouble with the police in the past with Eddie Ross. So is this your way of getting back at him?" Now, when that was circulated publicly, the Orcadians naturally thought that that was the case because this man was not viewed by many parts of that community as being the most honourable. So the local community actually turned on him and said he was making the whole thing up. But the police didn't. The police continued their search, their investigation, to the extent where Michael Ross was arrested and charged with the murder.
The eyewitness testimony, alongside other long-standing suspicions, are enough for the police to make a move on Michael Ross. Military police were informed at the base he was stationed at, and he was handed over to the Scottish police for questioning.
Ross was arrested and an investigation began, which revealed other evidence that could convict him, including a 9mm shell. Ross still kept up the pretense of being a decorated war hero, a man who could not possibly have committed such a dreadful crime. Indeed, when he got to court, he maintained that supreme confidence that I am a decorated soldier, I am a war hero, no one could possibly believe that I committed that kind of crime. It is beyond consideration.
Ross's credentials looked impeccable, whilst the prosecution's main witness, William Grant, did not put on a convincing display in court.
His evidence on paper was extremely significant because he said that it was Edmund Ross's son who he saw in the toilets at Kirkwall. His evidence on paper was significantly better than his evidence in court. He still said the same things, but he wasn't a terribly impressive witness. And what that meant, for my purposes, was that the case became much more of a circumstantial case rather than an eyewitness case. And what I tried to do when I spoke to the jury at the end of it all was to bring him in at the end, as it were, to pointing out all the other factors that I considered were relevant to establishing that it was Michael Ross, and then bringing him at the end to say, basically, he must be right.
I'm satisfied that the evidence I gathered was fair. It was very fair, because not many murder inquiries will you find that the accused father is taken in an interview We did that to be ultra fair so nothing could be cast up at us later on saying we'd done anything untoward. It was recorded anyway, but you'll not find many interviews where you find the accused father present. I'm quite satisfied that all the evidence we gathered was good, accurate. Whether it was sufficient to provide conviction, only a jury would tell that.
After much deliberation, when the jury returned to give their verdict, Michael Ross was found guilty of murder.
He got sentenced to 25 years, which is quite a lot if you consider that it's an action of a 15-year-old schoolboy. If you see it in the context of a thorough professional killing and then hidden for 13 years and would have carried on being hidden for the next 30-odd years, then you can see why the judge gave him a more substantial sentence. He tried him as an adult, he didn't try him as a juvenile.
When Ross heard the judge call him a vicious coward and sentenced him to 25 years minimum in jail, Ross did the most unexpected thing of all.
Just at the point where they were about to take him down, he just kind of nudged one of the officers very slightly, just knocking him off balance, at which point he let go of him, and at that point he vaulted the dock. Ran out the court, he went out that door, and the court macer, who is, I suppose, the equivalent of the English court usher, he went out of the door and grappled with him and caught him. He was then brought back and taken downstairs.
The police then had to piece together, number one, how did he get to court from Orkney? And they realised that he'd actually travelled by car. He'd hired a car, and they tracked the car down to a car park locally, not too far away from the court building. When the car was searched and opened, the boot was opened, in there was a machine gun, there was ammunition, there was basically camping equipment and hiking gear, and a grenade as well. And Michael had those things with him in the car. Now, the first thing you have to say, that isn't really the actions of an innocent man. It later transpired that he'd actually stolen the rifle from when he was in the armed forces and managed to get it back home to Orkney, where he was keeping it for whatever. We don't know the purpose, but there may well have been further rampage carried out by that individual had the police not found the vehicle and he'd been wrestled to the floor and put back into custody. But you don't carry that kind of weaponry and that kind of ammunition, which can be devastating to human life and property. You don't carry that around for fun.
A gun, ammunition, survival kit. He was planning to run from the court, get in the car and drive to the Highlands of Scotland, where he proposed to live rough. In fact, the car was literally packed with grenades, ammunition and guns. He could have killed a very, very great many people. In fact, at one point, it was said, and I quote, "That haul of weapons was designed to kill numerous people quickly." Ross didn't make it to the car, thank goodness, because he could easily have set off another Hungerford massacre, another Dunblane. He is a man who knew no doubts in his own ability. He'd been well trained by the British Army and he thought he could survive anything. In the end, he found himself in jail. But even then, he didn't give up. In jail, Ross thought out a plan to get himself out. Meticulously and with considerable skill, he fashioned a wooden angle grinder and put it in the place of the real angle grinder that he stole from the prison workshop. He was planning to use it to cut through the bars in his cell and escape. Thankfully, he didn't manage it because the prison staff realised that the angle grinder they now had in the workshop was in fact a fake. A brilliantly made fake, but fake nonetheless. Once again, Ross's attempt to escape prison and find himself his own personal freedom failed. He remains exactly where he belongs, behind bars.
Despite Ross's devious bid to win back his freedom, he is now well into his 25-year-long life sentence. He will be approaching retirement age by the time he is released.
A 15-year-old boy executing somebody in a restaurant with no motive on an island off the north coast of Scotland is unheard of. And I think if somebody was to write a piece of fiction with that storyline, nobody would believe it. It is almost unbelievable.
There is no such thing as a perfect murder. And in this instance, you can see somebody witnessed something back 10, 12, 14 years later and sat on that secret because they were frightened. They were genuinely scared as to the repercussions because of the family and what other islanders would make of them and what action might be taken against them unofficially or illegally. So that man had kept quiet for all those years. And when he come forward and he did reveal the truth, and it was the truth because we now know from evidence that Michael was the killer, that man, that individual, basically still lives alive to this day, where there are certain parts of that community who do not believe that he was telling the truth, that believe it was a vendetta against Eddie Ross to get Michael into trouble.
I think there was a good case against him to support the fact that it was him, and nothing came up in the course of that case or in anything that I've seen since to suggest to me that it was the wrong man. I have to confess, I don't lose sleep over the fact that there's an innocent man in prison, because that's not the way it seemed to me on the evidence. My own view is that he had a fascination for weaponry, he had a fascination for the army, and I think he wanted to know what it was like to kill somebody.
Normally when we talk about cases, we talk about rehabilitation, but I'm not quite sure how we're going to rehabilitate Michael Ross. He was actually in the army, paid to go and kill people. That was his job. Now, if he's going to come out of prison, what's he going to do? We can certainly stop him having access to guns. Any convicted prisoner who has access to a gun can go straight back to prison. He's on a life sentence, so any misbehaviour, he's back into prison. But what are we going to do? You know, it's hard enough to change a soldier from being a soldier to going back into the community. A lot of them find it very difficult to adapt to society and away from the support of the army. In his case, he hasn't got the support of the army, he hasn't got the support of the community, and he's got a very long prison sentence behind him. So he's going to have problems rehabilitating.
The terrible tragedy of this case is if only Michael Ross had used his very considerable talents, he might have benefited society instead of being condemned forever as a racist murderer. Join me, Geoffrey Wansell, next time for more Murders by the Sea.